In the name of the God who created us, in the name of the Christ who teaches us, in the name of the Spirit who journeys alongside us, welcome home, children of God. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Welcome to First Presbyterian Church this morning as we gather together as God's people in God's name. It is good to be here this morning. I welcome all of you here today, especially our guests and our visitors who I know have all come just to hear me preach, not to hear the chorale. But thank you for being here with us this morning. We are very grateful to have you. Appreciate you being here. A couple of very quick announcements. First, if you would please take a moment, sign those blue friendship registers on the inside aisle and pass those down. We would love to be able to welcome you later this week as well. Our worship service is being live streamed this morning as it is every Sunday. If you are watching your device right now, you can see it on Facebook. If you want to look at it later, go to YouTube, look up First Presbyterian Church, Elizabethton. You'll see that video here this morning. So if you want to go back and listen to anything else, re-experience the service, you're welcome to. But it also means if you have an announcement to make this morning, I would ask that you please make your way up here so that you can use the mics and be heard. Let's see, today is a fifth Sunday of the month. That means that our Everyone Counts goes to Presbyterian Disaster Assistance. If you're not familiar with Presbyterian Disaster Assistance, it's a ministry of the denomination that really works with local first responders in areas all around the world, try to be some of the first people with boots on the ground in times of crisis, national or weather emergencies, things like that. The fact that you showed up to church here this morning means that this church gives $1 for every person here to Presbyterian Disaster Assistance today. We would love for you to take part in that act of worship when the offering plates go around by putting $1 in yourself, and recognize that that act of putting something into the offering plate is symbolic of our offering of our time and our talents and our work. But whether you do anything or not, I want you to know that you being here today, just showing up, makes a difference in the lives of people around the world. And so I thank you for your presence here today. After worship this morning, there are a couple of activities, including, and you'll hear more about those a little bit later, but youth and people interested in some youth activities, we're going to meet downstairs very briefly to put some things on the calendar. You have an insert in your bulletins about the labyrinth. We'll have a labyrinth walk after worship, and I'll share with you about the logistics of that a little later on. Let's see, Nancy, you want to? While Nancy's making her way up here, have I missed any announcements that you did? Okay, wonderful. Nancy's going to share that today is the day when we receive our peacemaking offering, or Peace and Global Witness, and so Nancy's going to share briefly with us about that offering.
This is a quote from the 1994 book, You Can't Be Neutral on a Moving Train by Howard Zinn. To be hopeful in bad times is not just foolishly romantic. It is based on the fact that human history is a history not only of cruelty, but also of compassion, sacrifice, courage, kindness. What we choose to emphasize in this complex history will determine our lives. If we see only the worst, it destroys our capacity to do something. If we remember those times and places, and there are so many, where people have behaved magnificently, this gives us the energy to act, and at least the possibility of sending the spinning top of a world in a different direction. And if we do act in however small a way, we don't have to wait for some grand utopian future. The future is an infinite succession of presents. And to live now as we think human beings should live, in defiance of all that is bad around us, is itself a marvelous victory. Here at First Presbyterian, we have been striving to act for peace in our world for many years. Nearly 3 decades ago, we established the Peacemaking Committee, which works to raise awareness and offer avenues to promote peace within our individual lives, in our community, and around the globe, and with our planet Earth. The Peace and Global Witness offering is an annual special offering of the Presbyterian Church. 25% of this offering stays here with our congregation to support our peacemaking in our own community. 25% goes to Mid-Council, joining with other congregations in our areas to support peacemaking work in our region, and 50% supports the work for peace and reconciliation being done by Presbyterians around the globe. You may find envelopes in the pew in front of you. If you would like to make a cash offering, you can just write peacemaking on the outside of that envelope, or you may write a check and on the memo line, peacemaking offering, and put that in the offering plate. I invite you this morning to offer hope to a hurting world. The need is great. If we all dig a little deeper, we can make a big difference.
Will come soft rain, and the smell of the ground, and swallows circling, swallows circling with their shells, and frogs in the pool singing at night, and wild plum trees in tremulous white Robins will wear their feathery fine, whistling their winds on a love swine. And not one will know of the not one will know of the what I care, not one will care at last when it is done. If mankind perish utterly, and spring herself when she woke at dawn, would scarcely know that we were gone. Will come soft rain, will come soft
Please stand as you are able to join in the invitation to worship. Wrestling, struggling, resisting powers beyond understanding. Embracing, reconciling, sacred.
Let
Let us wrestle and let us worship that which is sacred. And please join in hymn 667, When Morning Gilds the Skies.
Jesus Christ be praised, all my brethren and prayer. To Jesus I declare, may Jesus Christ be praised. The sadness in my mind, the softness here I find. May Jesus Christ be praised. For faith thy earthly bliss, thy comfort still is this. May Jesus Christ be praised. Let my circle round in joyful most resolve. May Jesus Christ be praised. Let air and sea and sky from death to light recline. May Jesus Christ be praised. He is eternal song through all the ages long. May Jesus Christ be praised.
Please join in passing the peace.
Peace be with you. Peace be with you. Peace be with you.
We turn now to this time of meditation. In this worship service, we're blessed with gorgeous, inspiring music. We're blessed with words that offer hope and challenge. And we also take a few moments to rest in the silence and the splendor of this moment, just as it is. And this is something we can afford to do, because the essence of the Christian message, sometimes stated as you can do nothing to earn God's love, is you don't have to do anything to earn God's love. You don't have to be a different person. You don't have to embark on a self-improvement project. You don't have to do anything, because you are loved. And what that means is we can afford every now and then to rest. Maybe we'll pick up our self-improvement project later. We will take up again the noble work of making our world a better place. But for our sake and the sake of the whole world, it's good every now and then to rest in the stillness of this moment, so that when we arise from that conscious rest that we call meditation, we can do the work that is ours to do more wisely, more unselfishly, more compassionately, and yes, more joyfully, to have such good work to call upon us to do. And so I invite us now to turn to our time of meditation and to begin by just closing our eyes so that we can turn inward, simply because our minds are so easily distracted by, caught up by what's going on in the world of the senses. Beautiful as it is, it will allow our minds to become quieter. And then to assume a posture of meditation. Because a long time ago, women and men who paid attention to their experience discovered that what you do with the body, you are also doing with the mind. And although the mind is a slippery thing and hard to manage sometimes, the body is a little more workable. So we begin with the body. So please, as you're able, sit erect and don't slump. Your third grade teachers knew what they were saying when they said, sit up straight and pay attention. You might even experiment with sitting forward a little bit in the pew instead of reclining. But if reclining is more comfortable for you, please do that. Let your body be at rest and be at ease. Notice its weight in the pew, in the chair. We know that weight is produced by the gentle tug of gravity, Earth's gravity on your body, and the tiny but real tug of the gravitational field of your body on Mother Earth. That weight, your sensation of weight, is a very real hug between you and Mother Earth. Let your shoulders relax and drop toward the floor, and draw them back slightly as if trying to bring your shoulder blades together. You'll be sitting with what dancers call a nice open chest. Notice how it feels to sit this way. It is the embodiment of quiet confidence, of faith. And now, in the simplest of all meditations, I invite you to simply, for a few moments, let go of thoughts of the past, of hopes or fears about what will be or what might be, and for a few moments, simply pay attention to what is in this sacred moment. And so, in silence, we meditate. And now in the calm and quiet of this moment, would you please call to mind a person or a group or perhaps our whole world who you know this morning stands in special need of the healing peace of God, the peace that passes all understanding. And in your own way, call upon God, call upon life itself to bless them, just as they need to be blessed. Amen.
Our reading is from Genesis chapter 32, verses 22 through 31. After more than 20 years on the run, Jacob was finally ready to reconcile with his brother Esau. But Jacob feared for his life because he had stolen his brother's birthright and his inheritance. So Jacob sent word to Esau to meet him the following day. When night fell, Jacob got up and took his entire family and crossed the ford of the river Jabbok. And when he got to the river, he sent his family and all of his belongings ahead of him across the stream. And after they crossed over, Jacob was alone all night. Shortly after nightfall, a man came and wrestled with Jacob all night until the sun began to dawn. And when the man saw that he could not prevail against Jacob, he struck Jacob on the hip socket. And then the man said to Jacob, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go until you bless me." So the man said to Jacob, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he replied. And then the man said, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans and have prevailed." And then Jacob asked him, "Please, tell me your name." But the man said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there the man blessed him. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life is preserved." The sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. And therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the thigh muscle that is on the hip socket, because he struck Jacob on the hip socket at the thigh muscle.
Amen, indeed. Sarah, thank you for reading this morning, and thank you to the Chorale and to Matthew for the beautiful anthem this morning. You'll hear a little bit more about it later on, but just for your awareness, the piece you just heard, the Agnus Dei, is an original composition by Micah here on the back row. And this is the premiere performance of it this morning here at First Pres Elizabethton. So we are grateful to all of you for, sincerely grateful to all of you for your contributing your voices this morning, and Micah for sharing your work with us. Thank you. I doubt that there are a whole lot of us in here, at least if we come to this church on a regular basis, who are kept awake at night trying to reconcile things like a 7-day creation story that shows up in Genesis 1 and the math in the Bible that suggests that the earth is around 6,000 years old, who are wrestling with how to reconcile that we read in the Bible with the scientific knowledge that the earth is probably closer to 4.5 billion years old, that Jesus, in all likelihood, never rode on a dinosaur himself, and that the earth probably did not literally stop spinning and the sun stand still in the sky. I just know my audience here this morning. You are probably not kept awake by that at night very much. And it doesn't mean that there are not stories in the Bible to be read from a historical standpoint, but mostly just that the chances are good that if we are showing up at this church at least more than once, then our struggle, well, fair enough. Anybody can come one time. If you're showing up more than once, your struggle is probably not about reconciling a literal reading of the Bible with what we have learned and experienced about the world around us through science and observation. So honestly, whether we're talking about the entire Bible or just some parts of it that we find offensive and would rather not deal with, I expect that there are more than a couple of us in here this morning who come down more on the side of asking, why bother with these biblical texts at all? Do we even still need the whole Bible in order to be Christian? Because if to be Christian means that we follow the teachings of Jesus, then why not just throw out everything other than the Gospels? And so if any of that resonates with any of you in here this morning, then know that this morning and the next few weeks of worship are planned with you in mind. About a year after my dad died, I flew out to Dallas to spend a week with his only sibling, my Aunt Bonnie. My goal was to sit down with Bonnie and to be a recorder of stories. I wanted to ask her what it was like growing up in their house, to find out from her what my dad was like as a kid, what my grandparents were like, what stories did I want to remember so that I could share them with Wallace one day. And in some ways, it was kind of a second chance, things that I wished I had asked Dad when he was around. And so I took advantage of him having an older sister to ask those stories in his absence. And that trip was a wonderful and in many ways cathartic visit. It was like Dad was still present in those stories, even though he wasn't physically there with me. And so when, after the resurrection of Jesus, the disciples are gathered together telling stories of him, and then almost as if by magic, Jesus appears among them, I get that. Reliving stories of a loved one can make that person present among us in a very real way. But if you've ever stopped to really listen to your own family stories, to really pay attention to them, you may notice a few things if you're observant. First, they are almost always embellished. That's how stories work. Did Dad really walk 6 miles to school every morning and home every afternoon? And was it really uphill in both directions? Was there really snow on the ground as he trudged along every morning, even in August in Augusta, Georgia, when school started back? Of course not. But, a leisurely walk to school when it's sunny and clear and 70 degrees in the morning, it doesn't make for nearly as interesting a story. Nor does it get across the point of how we learn to endure hardships and how we can grow from difficult experiences. Another thing about those family stories is that some of them can be dark. Both of my paternal grandparents struggled with alcoholism. And that addiction landed both of them in the hospital on more than one occasion. Their struggles with alcohol had an impact on my dad and my aunt growing up. And so they both endured some difficult times, some instability and uncertainty as children. And when my grandparents both made the decision to get and to stay sober, my dad and my aunt learned about redemption and reconciliation and forgiveness. And I didn't get to hear all of those stories when I was a kid. Some of them were saved for later in life, but nonetheless, I am so glad to have them. Even the ones rated for mature audiences only. Because every single one of those stories is a part of my identity. Those stories helped to shape my dad and my aunt. They helped me to get to know my grandparents better. They helped me to imagine what they endured in life that led to their choices, and to reflect on what I can learn from them. Stories also help me to get to know myself better. They give me insight into my own and my cousin's personalities and why we are the way we are. And my guess is that for most of us, if we are content with leaving all or even some of the Bible behind and continuing on our journey of faith without it, it's because we know what's in the Bible. We know that it is a book full of dark and embarrassing stories. We know it is at times full of embellishments. And we know it contains some stories we might rather not ever confront. Like God asking Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac in order to prove his faithfulness. Or God deciding the whole entire world was so irredeemably corrupt that God just needed to send a flood and wipe out everyone and start over. These are dark stories, and they raise some uncomfortable questions. Or maybe, I don't know, you're more bothered by stories like Balaam and the donkey, where the donkey stops in its tracks and speaks in, one would suppose, Hebrew to Balaam. Seems a bit of an embellishment and hard to take seriously. Or one of my absolute favorite stories is when Elisha, the prophet, is getting on in age and is beginning to go bald. I don't appreciate this only because I am myself starting to go bald. But when all the kids start gathering around Elisha and making fun of him and calling him old baldy, he summons a she-bear to maul them all to death. It's a great story as long as you're not bothered by the mass slaughter of children for being children. In addition to these embarrassing stories, we have to contend with a Bible that treated slavery as a given, that condemned women for speaking in church when men were present, and that suggests people who are attracted to the same gender are best dealt with by stoning. There is simply no getting around the fact the Bible is full of some really unsettling, troubling, and difficult to contend with stories. So let me pose this rhetorical question. Do you think that our ancestors in the faith, the Jewish people who wrestled with many of these texts 2,000 years before Jesus came along, do you think they were oblivious to the difficult questions raised by some of these stories? Or what about the 2 millennia of Christians since then? The ones who committed themselves to following in the way of Jesus, the same Jesus who said, "Let the little children come unto me." And whoever sets a stumbling block before one of these children would do better to be thrown into the sea with a millstone around his neck. Do you think that Jesus, or the centuries of his followers, didn't see a conflict between those words of Jesus and Abraham being asked to sacrifice Isaac as a burnt offering? Killing your son on the altar seems like a bit of a stumbling block. Of course, they recognize the conflict. But the conflict wasn't enough to prompt them to dismiss all of Scripture, to get rid of the Bible and find another way to practice their spirituality. Instead, they recognized the Bible as a book of stories, of family tales, providing insight and warning, lessons and laughs about the people who have gone before. And I really think part of the difference is that we have been conditioned in our culture to look at the Bible as a book of answers. So that when something comes up in life, we can open up the Bible and find some singular insight that will guide us through troubled waters. But I don't think the Bible is a book of answers so much as it is a book of questions. Why might Abraham think that God was asking him to sacrifice Isaac? Was Abraham wrestling with guilt over the way that he banished Hagar and Ishmael? Was God trying to help Abraham see the folly of sacrificing a child for anything? A lesson we would still do well to learn as we continue to send our children off to war in the name of cheaper oil, or of exporting our own worldview to the rest of the developing world. The Bible is our origin story for any of us who claim to follow Jesus. It is not meant to be perfect or tidy or sanitary. Just like our lives and the lives of our ancestors, it is messy and funny and dark and troubling and difficult and uplifting and redemptive. And it also connects us to one another. Even though I didn't personally make an appearance in a single one of those stories that my Aunt Bonnie told me that week, every single one of those stories is a part of me. And they are a part of Wallace, even though he never met my grandparents. But my grandfather is his namesake. And every time I speak Wallace's name, I recall those stories of my grandfather after whom Wallace is named. Those are my stories. And I don't want to throw them out because they are difficult or troubling. They are way too important to my identity and to my connection to that part of my family. The story Sarah read us this morning, Jacob spends all night wrestling with this man that turns out to be a representative of God. And when morning comes, when the light dawns, that wrestling match finally comes to an end. But Jacob refuses to let go without a blessing. And that blessing comes in the form of a limp. So that Jacob's walk through the world for the rest of his life is forever changed. Jacob will never walk through the world in the same way again because of his encounter with God. That is how we are meant to engage these stories. Not as answers to be blindly received, but as the stories of our family, of our faith, to be wrestled with until they change us. So for the next several weeks, we're going to look at some of the texts in Scripture that Phyllis Tribble calls texts of terror. But even as I'm writing this sermon, I'm not sure I like that title for the series necessarily, but what I want to do is invite us to wrestle with these stories that we might rather leave behind. To do as Jacob does in our story this morning. Not to avoid them, as he first wanted to do with his brother Esau, but rather to meet them head on, to wrestle with them, to contend with them, and to see if we don't come away changed. Jacob's first instinct was to avoid that encounter altogether. Esau waited on the other side of the river, and Jacob knew that when he finally came face to face with Esau, it was going to be an emotionally difficult meeting. Jacob was going to have to own up to his own failures and his sins. He was going to have to acknowledge his own imperfections and how he had hurt someone he loved, his own brother, in pursuit of personal gain. Instead of avoiding that encounter, he wrestled with God. He wrestled with his past and with the stories he wanted to leave behind. And he came out on the other side of that wrestling match with a blessing. I hope we can do the same over the next few weeks. That we can look honestly at some of the stories in the Bible that are most comfortably avoided. That instead of skipping around them, we can confront them and let them confront us. We can question them and wrestle with them and learn from them because they are our stories. And in doing so, my hope is that we will find blessing in the process. Amen. Our hymn of response this morning is number 462, I Love to Tell the Story. I invite us to stand and join together in singing.
to tell a story for someone never heard. The message of salvation from God's holy word. I love to tell a story, will be my favorite glory, to tell the old story of Jesus and His love. I love to tell a story for those who know it best. Sing hungering and thirsty to hear it like the rest. And when it sings of glory, I sing a new song. Will be the old story that I have loved so long. I love to tell the story, will be my favorite glory, to tell the old story of Jesus and His love.
Please be seated, and I invite us to continue our worship as we receive our tithes and offerings.
Eyes of all wait upon Thee, and Thou givest them their meat in due season. The eyes of all wait upon Thee, and Thou givest them their meat in due season. Thou openest Thine hand and satisfiest the desire of every living thing, of every living thing, of every living thing. And Thou givest them their meat in due season. The eyes of all wait upon Thee, and Thou givest them their meat in due season.
Let us pray. God, it is sometimes easier to find you in some stories than others, but we know that you are in all the stories of our lives, of our history, of our ancestors, and of our encounters with one another. Give us eyes to see, ears to hear, and experience and to know that you are in every story, in every encounter, not just of our past, but of our lives and our week ahead, of those we run into, of those in our family, of the strangers in the street, to see you in everyone and everywhere. Amen. I'm going to shift up the order of worship just slightly from what's in your bulletins, invite us to be seated. I want to go ahead and save the last hymn until after the congregational meeting. So we'll stand and sing and then have our benediction. But we have a very quick item of business to take care of, and then we will sing our hymn and be dismissed. Where is Sherry? Hello, Sherry. We do have, if you're not a member of the congregation, apologies, please bear with us. This will take 2 or 3 minutes max, but it works very well for the flow of the service to kind of do it this way. We have a congregational meeting called this morning for the purpose of electing officers for next year. So Sherry chaired your nominating committee. I'll call the meeting to order. Where's Rebecca? Somewhere will be our clerk by virtue of her role as clerk of session. And so, Sherry, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. On behalf of the 2019 nominating committee, I place into nomination the following individuals for the office of Elder, class of 2022. Julia Rogers, Charles Faust, Ginger Oaks, David Roan. And for the class of 2020, Kathy Wing.
Are there any further nominations from the floor? If not, then I'll entertain a motion that nominations be closed and those be elected by acclamation. So Lydia, is there a second to Lydia's motion? Pat, I saw your hand first. All right, all in favor, please say aye. Opposed?
On behalf of the nominating committee, I place into nomination the following individuals for the office of Deacon, class of 2022. Lucinda Floden, Melody Faust, Mary Miller. And for the class of 2021, Carol Ann McElwee.
Are there any nominations from the floor? Then, a nomination, Joe, or are you raising to move that they be closed and which one? So, are you making a nomination, or are you moving that they be elected? Okay, you tell. Are there other nominations? If not, then we have a motion from Joe that nominations be closed and they be elected by acclamation. Is there a second? All right. Thomas, I saw Thomas's hand, so we'll call him. All in favor, please say aye. Opposed? The motion carries. Thank you very much, Sherry. This concludes our congregational meeting. Paul,
Hasn't this been a remarkable morning? So wonderful to have all of our guests with us, and I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge first of those. I want to talk to our East Tennessee State University family. If you are a faculty member or if you are a part of the staff, if you will, please stand up. We want to say hi to you. So good to have you all with us. Thank you. And a very wonderful surprise, wonderful welcome to you all, really. Thank you so much this morning. If you all just learned how to sing, you'd be just fine. It's just so good, Tom. Matthew, thank you so much for bringing everyone here and being a part of this. You know, along with all that went on this morning, there was something very special to happen, and we don't want to hear the first pres to leave it out. And Micah, come here a minute. Come down this way. Wow. That anthem was unbelievable. Where are you from, sir?
I'm from Maine, but I live.
Come over here so they can hear you. So you're from Maine?
I'm from Maine.
We
yes.
forgive you. That's first. Okay. And what brought you to East Tennessee State?
So my family lives in Virginia, and East Tennessee State University's music department is one of the best in the area, and I wanted to come here and sing in their wonderful choirs.
Well, we're honored that you did. We wanted you not to let this day go by, bringing such a wonderful piece of work that you have labored on, obviously, and that you all have prepared. And you've only finished this, what, 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago?
Yep, 3 weeks.
And they've learned it in 2 to 3 weeks. First Presbyterian Church of Elizabethton, Tennessee, arms open wide. The congregants of First Presbyterian Church in Elizabethton recognized Micah Mell for his composition of Agnus Dei. And for the debut of this work by the East Tennessee State University Chorale in the sanctuary of First Presbyterian Church of Elizabethton, Tennessee, we celebrate this day for the first public performance of your composition and congratulate you. Excuse me, that really wasn't part of the congratulations, but anyway. Excuse me. We celebrate this day for this first public performance of your composition and congratulate you on this achievement. Presented September 29, 2019 at First Presbyterian Church of Elizabethton. Signed, the Reverend Dr. Brian White, pastor, and Paul Gabinet, director of Chancel Choir. Congratulations. Thank you so much. Now take that on back to Maine and show them we're smarter than they think.
Thank you. You can remain standing. We're going to sing verses 1 and 4 of hymn number 450, Be Thou My Vision. After we sing, we'll have a benediction. The chorale actually has 2 more numbers for us. And then today is also our labyrinth day. So after their second number, you'll find Aubrey and Nancy in the back of the sanctuary here with a banner. For anyone who would like to take this gorgeous afternoon to spend some time outdoors and walk the labyrinth out back, you're invited to, after the chorale sings, to make your way back there and follow, and Nancy and Aubrey will lead us around the back, the banner to celebrate our labyrinth. So just so you kind of know how things are going to go. But for now, let's do verses 1 and 4, Be Thou My Vision.
Be thou my vision, O Lord of my heart. Not be all else to me save that thou art. Thou my best thought, my day or my night. Waking or sleeping, thy presence my light. My King of heaven, my victory won. May I reach heaven's joys all bright and sun. What of thy own heart, whatever befalls, still be my vision, O ruler of all.
Beloved in Christ, as you go forth from here today, Go out to see God in all the stories of your lives and all the encounters of your week. Know that God is there, working in and through you. And as you go forth this day, may the road rise up to meet you. May the wind blow always at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face. May the rains fall softly on your fields. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the hollow of her hand. Amen. I'd like you to be seated.
Who be a witness for my Lord? Who be a witness for my Lord? Who be a witness for my Lord? Who will be a witness for my Lord?
Oh, I'll be a witness for my Lord. 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 There was a man of the Pharisees. His name was Nicodemus, and he didn't believe. The same came to Christ by night, wanted to be taught out of human sight.
Nicodemus was a man who decided to know how a man can be born when he's old. Christ told Nicodemus as a friend, "Man, you must be born again." He said, "Man, if you want to be wise, repent, believe, and be baptized.
Then you'll be a witness for my Lord. You'll be a witness for my Lord. You'll be a witness for my Lord.
Saul is a witness for my Lord." You read about Samson. From his birth he was the strongest man that ever lived on earth. Way back yonder in ancient times, he killed 10,000 of the Philistines. Then old Samson went a-wandering about. Samson's strength was never found out, till his wife sat upon his knee. She said,
Tell me where your strength lies, if you please.
well, old Samson's wife, she talked so fair. Samson said, "Cut off of my head. Shave my head just as clean as your hand, and my strength will come like a natural man."
Samson was a witness for my Lord. Samson was a witness for my Lord. Samson
was a witness, Lord. Saul is a witness for my Lord.
There's another witness.
There's another witness.
There's another witness.
There's another witness. There's another witness. Another witness for my Lord. My soul is a witness for my Lord.
Before we sing our last piece, I just wanted to say thank you to Brian and to Paul and to all of you for the invitation to be here this evening. We're always excited to get into the community and let people know about ETSU and what we have to offer from our department. Just a little bit of bragging, if you don't mind. This group went to Wales this last summer, and we competed in an international choir competition, one of the biggest in the world that occurs. And we took first place in 2 categories and 7 others. It was broadcast throughout England on BBC and throughout Wales. We had some interviews, etc. And we were excited, obviously, for that win, but we were excited to represent the United States. We were excited to have ETSU represented on a world stage. So this summer, we are taking another trip and competing in another international competition. This one's going to be in Bratislava. We're going to fly in, I believe, into Vienna, and we're going to tour a little bit there, Salzburg, and Hungary, Budapest, and obviously Bratislava for the tour. And we're preparing our fundraisers now for that. If anybody feels moved to help us with that, we sure appreciate anything that can help us reach our goals of getting to Europe. But we ask for your thoughts and prayers as we go, and